You need to hear this right now because the second Isaiah Chance stepped through those prison gates, 6 Block was already lined up waiting for him. Let that sink in for a second. This is the same man prosecutors claim played a key role in the planned attack on Charles Jones, known as Julio Foolio, the same guy who spent months moving around with an ankle monitor while investigators watched every move he made. And now, the second he hit that prison unit, everything flipped upside down fast. It allegedly went down within his first few hours inside. Before he could even figure out where he was staying, people were already pressing him hard. That welcome turned ugly immediately, and according to reports, he was not prepared for the pressure that came with prison life at all. His own mother even took the stand during trial and described him as quiet, reserved, and helpful at home, which shocked a lot of people following the case. What really caught attention was the defense strategy. His attorney stood in front of the jury and basically argued that Isaiah was not some hardened street figure. They pointed out he had no gang tattoos, no confirmed gang membership, and no weapons directly linked back to him. The defense tried to paint him as a regular young man who got caught around the wrong crowd at the worst possible time, but the jury was not convinced. None of that changed the final outcome because Isaiah Chance was still found guilty on the top charge and is still facing the possibility of capital punishment. Now, after already having his future hanging by a thread, reports say his first day behind bars turned chaotic fast and his whole situation inside changed instantly. But to really understand how crazy this whole situation became, you gotta go all the way back because this story is way bigger than one prison incident. This is about an image slowly falling apart piece by piece until the courtroom saw something completely different from the tough persona people were used to online. By the end of it, the headlines, the testimony, and the pressure painted a picture of somebody fighting hard to avoid spending the rest of his life behind bars. So now the focus shifts back to Jacksonville, Florida, a city that has been connected to one of the most intense street conflicts in the South for years. A lot of people outside Florida did not fully pay attention to what was happening there until Julio Foolio's name started blowing up across social media and music platforms. But according to investigators, the violence connected to rival groups had already been going on long before the spotlight hit the city. On one side was 6 Block, also called KTA, a crew heavily tied to Foolio's music, online presence, and public image. His songs, diss records, and social media posts constantly reference that side of Jacksonville culture. Prosecutors claim Charles Jones, known as Julio Foolio, was not just loosely connected either. Detectives testified that he was viewed as one of the major figures associated with that movement, putting him at a high level within the organization according to their investigation. Then on the other side, investigators pointed toward ATK, short for Ace's Top Killers, along with another affiliated group called 1200. Authorities said this conflict was not some quick rap industry argument that started over music or internet drama. Testimony in court connected the rivalry to multiple violent incidents stretching back years, including several attacks investigators linked to both sides. By the time the music industry caught on, law enforcement said the tension had already been building for a long time, and the streets around Jacksonville had been caught in the middle of it all. Now this is where Isaiah Chance officially steps into the middle of the story. Isaiah Chance, who was 23 years old during the trial, was publicly described by prosecutors as being connected to ATK. Investigators brought out phone records, social media activity, and even a heated Twitter Spaces argument between Chance and Charles Jones, known as Julio Foolio. Detectives reportedly kept those online exchanges as evidence because they believed it showed direct tension between the two before the entire case blew up publicly. There was even a recorded online argument between the two that people across the internet watched in real time. According to testimony, Jacksonville's gang unit had already been watching the situation closely. Investigators believed the conflict between them had been serious for a long time, and they used those public exchanges to help strengthen their case against Chance. But here's where the situation gets complicated. The image prosecutors painted in court did not fully match the picture his defense team tried to present to the jury. His own attorney stood up in court and argued that Isaiah Chance was not officially tied to any gang organization. The defense stressed that no recovered weapons were directly linked back to him, no clothing evidence pointed straight at him, and they argued he did not legally meet the standards investigators usually use for documented gang members. The attorney even pointed out that arrest records reportedly did not formally classify him as a gang member. Then things got even more emotional when his mother testified during the penalty phase of the trial. She described her son as caring, quiet, and reserved around family. She told the court she never personally saw him involved with gangs or weapons, and said she had spent years helping him through speech difficulties because, according to her testimony, He did not begin speaking fluently until he was around 4 or 5 years old. One of his father figures also took the stand and talked about Isaiah wanting a different future for himself. He said Chance once spoke about becoming a merchant marine, traveling the world, and building a life with real purpose instead of getting caught up in street violence. Still, despite all of those emotional testimonies and arguments from the defense, the jury ultimately convicted him on the top charge after hearing all the evidence presented in court. He was still found guilty, but what stands out in this case is the argument that Isaiah Chance may have been caught deep inside a violent street conflict he was never truly built to handle. Prosecutors did not accuse him of being the person who carried out the attack directly. Instead, they claimed his role was helping track movements and pass along information during the setup leading to the fatal incident. According to investigators, he acted as the lookout, the person helping monitor locations and movements before the attack happened. Court testimony described a silver Chevrolet Cruze moving through Tampa late at night on June 23, 2024. Prosecutors alleged Chance got out at different locations, used his phone to check and confirm movements connected to Foolio's vehicle, and helped others keep track of where Charles Jones was that night. Investigators painted him as the eyes behind the operation, someone helping guide the situation without personally pulling the trigger. And prosecutors argued that detail revealed a lot about his role in the case. They claimed he allegedly helped organize and support the plan, but stayed away from direct physical violence himself. That became a major focus during trial, because the state worked hard to show every person involved had a specific responsibility in what they described as a coordinated attack. Now, the timeline of June 23, 2024 became a huge part of the courtroom battle because every move leading up to the attack was heavily examined. Foolio had just turned 26 years old on June 21st, only 2 days before his passing. Earlier that weekend, he posted online thanking God for allowing him to see another birthday, a message that hit a lot harder after everything that followed. Friends, fans, and followers saw somebody celebrating life and making it to another year, despite years of public tension and danger surrounding him. Days before the incident, Foolio had also promoted his Tampa birthday plans online through Instagram posts and flyers. Prosecutors argued those public posts gave people tracking him a clear idea of where he would be staying and celebrating. According to the state's case, investigators believe the defendants started putting together their plan after seeing those social media posts announcing the party and Airbnb location, turning what was supposed to be a birthday weekend into something far darker. According to prosecutors, everything allegedly started on June 14th, the day Foolio's birthday flyer hit social media. Investigators argued that was the moment the planning phase began. They said this was not some rushed decision thrown together overnight. The state claimed the group had more than a full week to organize travel, gather information, and prepare for what prosecutors described as a coordinated mission targeting Charles Jones. Court testimony said the suspects traveled from Jacksonville to Tampa on June 22nd, one day before the incident. Prosecutors argued they arrived early, settled in, and stayed ready while tracking Foolio's movements around the city. By the time June 23rd arrived, investigators believed the operation was already fully in motion. That night, Foolio and people around him were reportedly moving through different nightlife spots across Tampa during his birthday weekend celebration. Prosecutors mentioned visits to clubs, including a gentleman's club called Teasers, while describing him as somebody out enjoying himself and celebrating another year of life. But according to the state's timeline, investigators believed Isaiah Chance and his girlfriend, Alicia Andrews, were nearby in a silver Chevrolet Cruze monitoring those movements the entire time. Surveillance footage reportedly showed the Cruze appearing near two separate locations connected to Foolio's group during the same night. Prosecutors leaned heavily on that footage during closing arguments. The state argued the pair never entered the venues or acted like customers there to enjoy the nightlife. Instead, prosecutors claimed they were only there to track locations, observe movements, and pass information along to others involved in the case. According to prosecutors, a second vehicle, a Chevrolet Impala, was allegedly carrying the men accused of carrying out the attack. Investigators identified them as Shawn Gathright, 20 years old, Davion Murphy, 29, and Rashad Murphy, 32. Court testimony claimed the group was armed with two AR-style rifles, along with a Glock pistol fitted with an extended magazine. Prosecutors argued the vehicles were moving together throughout the night as part of the coordinated plan investigators had been tracking. At some point during the birthday weekend, Foolio reportedly had to leave the Airbnb because too many people had gathered there. After that, he and people around him attempted to get rooms at the Home 2 Suites Hotel near the University of South Florida on McKinley Drive. Prosecutors said that location became the final stop in the chain of events leading to the fatal incident. According to the state's timeline, Isaiah Chance allegedly exited the vehicle and made a phone call shortly before the attack unfolded. Prosecutors argued the Chevrolet Impala then pulled into the area moments later. Surveillance footage from the hotel parking lot became one of the biggest pieces of evidence shown during trial. With jurors watching the chaotic moments, investigators said captured the attack as it happened. The state alleged the masked individual stepped out and immediately began attacking Foolio's vehicle. Investigators recovered 31 9mm shell casings from the scene, and prosecutors also claimed the rifles appeared equipped with brass catchers, devices designed to collect spent casings and reduce forensic evidence left behind. That detail became a major point during trial because prosecutors argued it showed planning and preparation rather than a random act of violence. Investigators said the attackers allegedly circled Foolio's vehicle before firing repeatedly as the car attempted to escape the parking lot. As the vehicle sped away, prosecutors claimed one of the individuals kept attacking it. Authorities later found the vehicle heavily damaged, and medical testimony stated Charles Jones suffered critical injuries to major organs during the incident. Charles Jones was pronounced gone at the scene, while 3 other people were injured during the incident. After everything happened, prosecutors said the group immediately split up and headed in different directions. According to investigators, Isaiah Chance, Alicia Andrews, and Rashad Murphy allegedly took an Uber back toward Jacksonville, while license plate reader technology later tracked Davion Murphy driving the Chevrolet Cruze away from Tampa. Prosecutors also said Shawn Gathright left separately in the Impala as authorities began piecing the case together fast. Within days, investigators were already closing in. One major detail prosecutors highlighted was that Isaiah Chance was still wearing an ankle monitor tied to an unrelated case during the time of the investigation. That electronic monitoring reportedly helped detectives track movements connected to the timeline prosecutors presented in court. When detectives eventually arrived at a home on Captiva Bluff Road in Jacksonville, searching for Chance, reports say officers surrounded the property and repeatedly announced themselves for nearly 15 to 20 minutes before anyone came outside. Prosecutors argued that moment showed the pressure building around everyone connected to the investigation as law enforcement moved quickly after the incident. Court records also revealed a statement investigators claimed Chance made directly to a Jacksonville detective. According to testimony, he allegedly said that once his ankle monitor came off, he wanted to leave the state and never be seen again. That statement became a major talking point during the case because prosecutors used it to argue he knew serious charges were coming and was thinking about escaping before he could be arrested. What made the situation stand out even more was the contrast between the image tied to the online street persona and the statements presented in court. Prosecutors argued the investigation exposed fear, panic, and attempts to avoid responsibility once arrests started closing in. As the legal process unfolded, every court appearance, witness statement, and piece of evidence added more attention to how the defendants acted once the pressure became real, and prosecutors believed that behavior revealed far more than the social media image people had seen before the case exploded nationwide. Now let's talk about Shawn Gathright because his role in this case became one of the biggest focuses during trial. Gathright was just 18 years old when he was first arrested in connection to the incident. Prosecutors identified him as one of the alleged individuals seen in surveillance footage from the hotel parking lot that night. According to the state, forensic evidence connected items tied to Gathright not only to the Tampa incident, but also to other violent cases investigators were examining, including a reported 2023 attempt on Julio's life and a separate 2022 homicide investigation. The prosecution presented Gathright as one of the central figures during the attack, but one moment after his arrest completely shifted the atmosphere in court. During interrogation room surveillance footage shown to jurors, Gathright was seen pacing around nervously before suddenly climbing onto a table and attempting to escape through the ceiling tiles of the room. Investigators actually captured the entire thing on camera, and prosecutors later played that footage during trial for the jury to watch. That scene shocked a lot of people following the case because prosecutors argued it completely clashed with the image often projected online and in street culture. The state claimed the same person accused of taking part in the fatal attack was later desperately trying to escape through a police station ceiling after getting arrested. Prosecutors used that footage to argue panic started setting in once reality caught up with everyone involved. Then things inside the courtroom became tense again during the actual trial proceedings. Reports described emotional outbursts, disruptions, and moments serious enough that officers had to remove one of the defendants from court in handcuffs. Prosecutors argued the behavior inside the courtroom reflected how chaotic the situation had become as the case moved closer to a verdict. With top-level charges and possible capital punishment consequences hanging over the defendants, every reaction inside that courtroom drew major attention. And after the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts on May 8, 2026, reports said Gathright broke down emotionally in court. That moment became another powerful image connected to a case that had already gripped social media, music fans, and courtroom watchers across the country. After the guilty verdicts were read, reports said a bailiff had to escort Shawn Gathright out of the courtroom while he was emotional and crying in front of everyone watching. Cameras were rolling, the courtroom was packed, and that reaction instantly spread across social media. Prosecutors pointed to moments like that while arguing the confidence seen before the arrest completely disappeared once the reality of life sentences and possible capital punishment consequences became real. Then attention shifted to Rashad Murphy, the oldest of the group at 32 years old. According to investigators, Murphy allegedly posted content on Instagram shortly after the incident that detectives believed referenced Foolio's passing in a celebratory way. Prosecutors highlighted one post showing Tom Brady and Bill Belichick celebrating a Super Bowl win, while another reportedly included the phrase "hate me kindly." Detectives later testified they believed those posts were connected to the incident and used them as part of the broader case presented to jurors. Murphy's interview with detectives also became a major point during trial. According to testimony, he initially denied ever being in Tampa at all, but prosecutors said investigators later confronted him with cell phone records and surveillance footage that they believed placed him near the scene. Detectives claimed his story started changing after that evidence was shown during questioning, and they even noted details about which hand he used while writing, because surveillance footage from the incident allegedly showed one of the individuals using their left hand during the attack. Davion Murphy also drew attention during interrogation footage shown in court. Prosecutors said surveillance cameras inside the interview room captured him making motions that appeared to reenact parts of the incident while speaking with investigators. That footage reportedly became another dramatic moment during the trial because prosecutors argued it reflected reckless behavior even after arrests had already been made. Throughout the case, prosecutors repeatedly argued that the actions and reactions of the defendants after the incident revealed panic, poor judgment, and emotional pressure once law enforcement closed in. From social media activity to interrogation room behavior to emotional courtroom reactions, investigators believe those moments gave jurors a closer look at how the defendants responded once the case against them became impossible to ignore. Prosecutors argued that many of the actions shown throughout this case reflected young men who became heavily influenced by street culture and violent environments without fully understanding the consequences waiting at the end of those choices. And in the middle of all that attention, Isaiah Chance became one of the most talked about figures because of the contrast between the image presented online and the testimony shared inside the courtroom. During the penalty phase, Chance's mother spoke emotionally about her son, describing him as quiet, church-going, and reserved around family. She testified that he struggled with speech development as a child and did not begin speaking fluently until several years into his early childhood. Meanwhile, his defense attorney argued that investigators never officially documented him as a gang member and claimed there was no legal classification directly tying him to organized gang affiliation. The defense also brought up his interests outside the streets, including testimony that he once wanted to become a merchant marine and pursue a completely different future. Once the trial started airing publicly on court TV, social media exploded with reactions almost instantly. Viewers watched emotional family testimony, courtroom breakdowns, and statements from both prosecutors and defense attorneys, and a lot of people online started debating the bigger picture behind the case. Some argued the defendants appeared to be trying to live up to images connected to their environment and internet culture, rather than the reality of who they actually were away from the spotlight. But once the guilty verdicts landed in a Florida first-degree case tied to a nationally known rapper and a long-running Jacksonville gang conflict, the attention only got bigger. The courtroom was just one chapter. After the convictions, the focus quickly shifted toward what prison life, sentencing, and the long-term fallout would look like for everyone connected to one of the most heavily discussed rap-related cases in recent years. For a lot of people following this case, the story did not feel like it ended once the guilty verdicts came down. Outside the courtroom, there was already heavy discussion online about what prison life could look like for the men convicted in such a high-profile case. And because the Foolio case received non-stop media attention, prosecutors and commentators alike noted that the defendants were entering the Florida prison system as widely recognized names, not anonymous inmates. The trial was streamed publicly, clips spread across social media daily, and hip-hop fans across the country followed every update closely. Inside prison systems, information about major cases often moves quickly through television, phone calls, family members, and outside connections. In a case tied so heavily to Jacksonville street politics, many people believed news of the convictions would spread fast throughout Florida correctional facilities. Investigators had already spent years describing the rivalry involving 6 Block ATK and affiliated groups as a long-running conflict tied to multiple violent incidents. Prosecutors portrayed Charles Jones, known as Julio Foolio, as one of the most visible figures connected to that feud, both through music and public reputation. Even after his passing, the attention surrounding his name and the ongoing rivalry never fully disappeared, especially online where discussions about the case continued non-stop. Because of that, there was a widespread speculation online about how the convicted men might be received once transferred into the Department of Corrections system. Supporters, critics, bloggers, and social media commentators all debated whether tensions connected to the Jacksonville conflict could follow them behind prison walls. Reports and rumors quickly circulated claiming the defendants faced immediate pressure after entering the system, with many people suggesting the attention around the case made them targets from the moment they arrived. Throughout all of it, the case continued showing how social media, rap culture, street conflicts, and the criminal justice system had become deeply connected in the public eye, turning every new development into a nationwide conversation almost instantly. Once the convictions became public, a lot of discussion online shifted toward how prison dynamics might affect the men involved in the case. For Isaiah Chance especially, people focused on the fact that prosecutors described him as someone who allegedly helped coordinate movements and information tied to the incident without being accused of personally taking part in the attack directly. Even though his defense argued he was never officially documented as a gang member, his name and face were now connected statewide to one of Florida's most talked about criminal cases. Because the Foolio case received non-stop media attention, many people believed the defendants entered prison already carrying major reputations behind them. Commentators online pointed out that high-profile cases tied to long-running street conflicts often attract immediate attention inside correctional systems, especially when inmates or their families already know details about the people involved through news coverage and social media discussions. One point repeatedly raised by prosecutors during trial was that the legal system treats conspiracy and participation seriously, even if different people allegedly played different roles during the crime itself. The state argued that helping organize or support a fatal attack carried consequences just as severe as physically carrying it out. That argument became a major part of how the prosecution framed the case against all defendants involved. Attention also stayed heavily focused on Shawn Gathright, who was 18 when the arrest first happened, and later became one of the most recognizable faces connected to the trial. Meanwhile, the Murphy brothers, both older and already tied by investigators to gang-related allegations, also remained under intense public scrutiny because of their reported social media activity and courtroom behavior after the incident. At the same time, all of the defendants were still facing the possibility of capital punishment recommendations following their convictions, adding even more pressure to an already nationally watched case. Between the prison rumors, the media attention, and the sentencing phase still ahead, the spotlight surrounding the Foolio case only continued growing louder. The penalty phase of the trial officially began on May 11, 2026, putting even more pressure on a case that had already captured national attention. The same jury that spent weeks hearing testimony, reviewing surveillance footage, examining social media evidence, and deliberating for hours before convicting all 4 defendants, was now being asked to make another massive decision. This time, prosecutors wanted jurors to consider whether capital punishment should be recommended. Under Florida law updated in 2023, at least 8 out of the 12 jurors must agree before a capital punishment recommendation can move forward. Prosecutors laid out several aggravating factors they believed justified that outcome. The state argued the incident was carefully planned, coordinated across multiple people, and carried out as a targeted ambush rather than a spontaneous act of violence. During the penalty phase, prosecutors emphasized claims that the defendants traveled across the state, tracked Charles Jones through multiple locations during his birthday weekend, and allegedly used firearms equipped in ways intended to reduce forensic evidence left behind. Investigators also highlighted surveillance footage showing the suspects allegedly circling the vehicle before the incident began, arguing those details pointed toward clear premeditation. At the same time, the courtroom atmosphere shifted emotionally as family members and loved ones of the defendants took the stand to speak on their behalf. Parents, relatives, and close family friends shared personal stories and emotional testimony in an effort to humanize the men now facing the possibility of capital punishment sentences. That contrast between the violent evidence presented by prosecutors and the emotional pleas from families became one of the most intense parts of the entire trial. During the penalty phase, family members and supporters of the defendants took the stand and shared emotional testimony about the men now facing possible capital punishment recommendations. Shawn Gathrights grandmother described him as a good kid with potential, while his stepfather called him smart and naturally curious. His sister became emotional while speaking in court, and testimony from relatives painted a picture of difficult family circumstances and instability during parts of his upbringing. Davion Murphy's defense team also focused heavily on his background. Attorneys brought up reported learning difficulties, struggles at home, and testimony stating he had attended around 14 different schools after being moved between multiple living situations. The defense argued those experiences shaped major parts of his life long before the case ever happened. Isaiah Chance's family shared similar testimony while trying to show another side of him beyond the headlines. His father spoke about having a positive relationship with his son, while another witness testified that Chance once talked about wanting a meaningful future, including dreams of working at sea and traveling the world as a merchant marine. The defense used those stories to argue the men were more complicated than the violent image connected to the case. Shawn Gathright himself also addressed the jury directly during the penalty phase. In court, he reportedly said, "I'm not here to dispute anything. I'm here to be a man and take responsibility and express my feelings about this whole situation. I feel very remorseful. This is a terrible situation. It's been a traumatic experience." At the time of his arrest, he was 18 years old, and by the penalty phase, he had turned 20. Still, prosecutors continued reminding jurors about the scale of the crime itself. They pointed back to the fatal incident that took place while Charles Jones was celebrating his 26th birthday in Tampa. Medical testimony stated he suffered fatal injuries during the attack, and prosecutors argued the violence of that night could not be separated from the emotional testimony being heard in court. Foolio's mother, Sandricus Mays, also spoke publicly after the verdict, making it clear she had strong feelings about the outcome and the long road that led to it. When the jury returned guilty verdicts against all 4 defendants, Foolio's mother, Sandricus Mays, reacted publicly almost immediately. She posted emotionally on Instagram, writing, "Justice for Foolio, the right get back, guilty as charged, we all gonna cry together. What they say? Pop a bottle of Don Julio, let's drink up." After nearly 2 years of investigations, arrests, court hearings, and non-stop media coverage, that verdict marked a major emotional moment for her and many people who had followed the case from the beginning. Looking at the bigger picture, this entire case also became a powerful example of how social media can dramatically affect real-life situations. Prosecutors repeatedly argued that online posts played a direct role in helping investigators piece together the timeline leading to the incident. Charles Jones had publicly shared details about his birthday trip to Tampa through Instagram posts and flyers, including mentions of where celebrations were happening and where he was staying. According to the state, investigators believe those posts helped the defendants track his movements throughout the weekend. Prosecutors also pointed out that when plans changed during the night, including reports that Foolio had to leave the Airbnb and move to another location, information continued spreading online in real time. The state argued that those updates allowed the suspects to keep following the group's movements as the situation unfolded. That detail became one of the most heavily discussed parts of the case because it showed how public posts can quickly turn dangerous when the wrong people are paying attention. Another major conversation surrounding the trial focused on how internet culture, music, and social media can influence the way people present themselves publicly. Throughout the proceedings, many online commentators argued that younger generations sometimes feel pressure to adopt certain images, affiliations, or personas tied to street culture without fully understanding the consequences that can come with those choices. The courtroom testimony, social media evidence, and emotional reaction shown throughout this trial pushed that discussion even further into the spotlight. During the trial, Isaiah Chance's own defense team described him as someone with no gang tattoos, no officially documented gang membership, and no weapons directly tied back to him. Attorneys portrayed him as an aspiring rapper who became connected to dangerous people and situations through proximity rather than long-established status in street organizations. But prosecutors argued that despite those claims, he was still closely linked to the network investigators said helped organize the attack on Charles Jones. According to the state's case, online disputes, social media exchanges, and associations with people connected to ATK placed Chance deep enough inside the conflict that when the plan allegedly came together, prosecutors believed he became an active participant. And now, after the conviction, many online discussions have focused on how those decisions completely changed the course of his life. Between the prison rumors, the possibility of a capital punishment sentence, and the national attention tied to the case, the consequences became massive almost overnight. The case also sparked wider conversations about how quickly people can become pulled into violent situations simply by staying close to certain environments and conflicts. Supporters of the defense argued Isaiah was not the hardened figure people imagine online, while prosecutors maintained he knowingly helped support a fatal setup that ended in a tragic incident. At the same time, many people following the case pointed out that high-profile violent incidents connected to long-running rivalries often continue carrying consequences long after the courtroom process ends. Because Foolio had such a major public presence through music and social media, emotions surrounding his passing remained extremely intense, especially among people who believed the attack was carefully planned and carried out over the course of his birthday weekend. A lot of people following the case online described the attack on Charles Jones as far more than a spontaneous confrontation. Prosecutors argued it was a planned ambush carried out after tracking his movements across Tampa during his birthday weekend. Because of that, emotions connected to the case stayed extremely intense, especially among people who supported Foolio or had connections to Jacksonville street culture. Once the defendants entered prison after such a nationally known case, many observers believed tension and retaliation rumors were almost guaranteed to follow. The irony surrounding the situation became one of the biggest talking points online. Prosecutors described a group that allegedly traveled across the state to carry out violence, only for reports to later surface claiming the convicted men immediately faced pressure once entering prison themselves. To many people watching the story unfold, that cycle of violence felt like a harsh reflection of the same street conflict that had already taken multiple lives over the years. Another major debate online centered around Shawn Gathright breaking down emotionally in court after the guilty verdicts were announced. Social media reactions were split. Some mocked the tears, while others pointed out he was only 18 years old when the arrest first happened, and still very young while facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars. That courtroom moment became one of the most widely shared clips connected to the trial. What many commentators focused on, though, was the timing of that emotion. The discussion quickly shifted toward how fear, regret, and remorse often become visible only after arrests, convictions, and sentencing possibilities become real. Prosecutors repeatedly argued that the planning phase of the crime showed preparation, coordination, and intent long before anyone entered a courtroom. For many people watching the trial, that contrast between confidence before the incident and emotional reactions afterward became one of the clearest examples of the difference between public image and real-world consequences. The social media persona, the online conflicts, and the street reputation all looked very different once prison sentences and capital punishment discussions entered the picture. Throughout the trial, prosecutors argued that the defendants built public identities around online feuds, violent music culture, and social media behavior tied to an ongoing street conflict that had already taken multiple lives. But once arrests happened and the courtroom process began, a very different picture started appearing through testimony, surveillance footage, and emotional reactions shown during the case. Jurors saw interrogation footage, emotional outbursts, social media posts prosecutors described as celebratory, and testimony from family members describing dreams, struggles, and completely different sides of the defendants' lives. One moment showed an attempted escape through an interrogation room ceiling. Another involved emotional statements about wanting a future working at sea as a merchant marine. Then came courtroom tears, remorseful testimony, and visible reactions after guilty verdicts were announced. Those moments created a sharp contrast between the public image surrounding the case and the reality unfolding inside court. When stripped away from the rap industry headlines, internet drama, and gang allegations, prosecutors argued the case came down to 4 men between the ages of 20 and 32, making a fatal and carefully planned decision that permanently changed multiple lives. The youngest defendant, Shawn Gathright, was only barely into adulthood when prosecutors said he traveled to Tampa carrying a rifle connected to the incident. That detail alone became one of the most heavily discussed parts of the entire case online. At the center of everything was the passing of Charles Jones, known as Julio Foolio, during what was supposed to be a birthday celebration weekend. Prosecutors said he posted flyers online, booked an Airbnb, visited clubs, and later attempted to get a hotel room after plans changed during the night. According to investigators, those public movements allowed the defendants to track him step by step until the fatal ambush unfolded. As the penalty phase continued, the stakes became even higher. Under Florida law, at least 8 jurors would need to support a capital punishment recommendation before the judge could move forward with sentencing considerations. While that decision remained pending, the defendants were already beginning life inside the prison system, where reports and speculation about their treatment spread almost immediately after their arrival. Charles Jones was out celebrating life that weekend. He had just turned 26, posted the flyers, linked up with friends, moved through Tampa enjoying his birthday, and thought he had more time ahead of him. But in that parking lot on McKinley Drive, prosecutors said everything ended in seconds after a barrage of rounds tore through the scene. Investigators recovered dozens of shell casings, and the incident left Foolio gone before he ever got the chance to see 27. Now the people convicted in connection to that night, the alleged individuals involved, the accused lookout, and everyone prosecutors said helped support the plan, are facing the reality of what comes after a decision like that. Prison time, possible capital punishment recommendations, non-stop public attention, and consequences that may follow them for the rest of their lives. According to reports and online discussion, even their first days inside prison already showed how serious the fallout from this case had become. Drop a comment below and say what you think. Do you believe the defendants deserve capital punishment, or should they spend life behind bars instead? And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button right now, because this channel stays locked in on every major update and breaks these stories down in full detail. Like the video, share it with somebody following the case, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss the next breakdown.